Also, I'd like to ask you, due to the number of people who may be attending today, we might have some technical difficulties, but we hope to clean those issues up in post-production, but please bear with us if we do have any issues. So with that, we'll get started. Thank you all for coming.
Hello, my name is Angelette Pritchett with Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. Our equity project began a little over a year ago with a vision for addressing inequities and educational disparities for Missouri's citizens. The department's desire is to build a careful process for addressing inequities and to show our commitment toward equitable outcomes for all Missourians, aligned with our vision to empower every Missourian with the skills and education needed for success. The Building Bridges series is an informative look at how Missouri's colleges and universities and community organizations are addressing equity. We hope that you learn from these shared experiences, and we thank you again for joining us.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our presentation. My name is Kimberly Taylor Riley. I am the Commissioner of Civilian Oversight for the City of St. Louis. The Civilian Oversight Board has the jurisdiction over the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department regarding complaints that are made against them for misconduct. So that's kind of a nutshell of who we are and how we come to be here. I'm very excited to do this presentation on behalf of the Missouri Higher Education Group. This is very exciting for us. This is the first time we've been invited and that we've participated. So we are looking forward to having a good exchange with you. I'm very sorry that we had to do it in this format and that we can't meet personally and talk one-on-one, but hopefully in the age of COVID, we'll be able to figure out a way to work around that. But for now, this was the best that we could do, but we're hoping that we'll be able to have some question and answer time at the end. So if you have questions or if things crop up that you'd like to talk to us about, then please let us know that. If you want to send it in through a chat, I don't know if that's going to be available, but if it is, then certainly send those in that way. We'll take all of those questions, and then if we can't get to them all at the end, we'll provide responses, and hopefully they can provide those to the group of attendees so that you guys will all have the same information. But my contact information is at the end of the presentation, so you'll have that as well if you want to contact me directly with any questions that you might have. So with that, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. What we're going to be doing is our presentation with respect to education and civil rights enforcement. What we're talking about is things that are happening in the aftermath of Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. We're wanting to kind of tie these things together because I don't know that everyone understands that you don't really have an enforceable right if you don't know that the right exists at all. So we need to start talking to people about what their rights are and how they can go about enforcing them and protecting themselves and protecting their family members if indeed that becomes necessary. So that's kind of what the premise of the discussion will be about. And again, I'm really sorry that we can't do this personally, but hopefully you and I will be able to establish some sort of rapport and you'll be able to at least understand what it is that we're trying to put forward. And from there, you can ask me some questions and maybe we'll be able to have a dialogue at some point offline. So the presentation outline is very, very simple. We're going to talk about the 6 degrees of separation. And you know, they always talk about whether or not people are related to each other and how there are probably 5 or 6 people between you and whoever it is that you think that you're related to or want to be connected to. It's all about that networking. So we're going to be talking about the 6 degrees of separation between enforcement of your civil rights and education. How law enforcement oversight is born. So how did this group come to be? How do other groups like us come to be? And then ultimately the relationship between education and ensuring community safety. So how we take those pieces of information and bring those together to make sure that we're all getting the benefit of the society that we live in. So the link between law enforcement and civil rights, how are those things connected? Well, what you probably don't know is that law enforcement did not just grow up organically, as much as we would like to think that it did. Instead, what happened was initially they had what they called a watch system. And this is in most of the northern states. And what was happening was it was kind of like Paul Revere and the British are coming. It was a discussion of who's going to be watching our borders, who's going to make sure that we're safe, that interlopers aren't coming in to take over. And so what they would do is they would come up with these night watch folks who most of the time slept or drank while they were supposedly providing the security for their communities. Generally, it wasn't something people volunteered for. A lot of times it was something you had to do to pay your debt to society. So say that you were convicted of public drunkenness, you might be the person that they designate to be the night watch person for a night or two to do your penance for having been caught doing something that they considered to be unseemly. Eventually, you ended up with a centralized formal police department. And those agencies came about in the early 1800s. But what was happening was in Boston, New York, Chicago, and places like that, they started purchasing private security because people that were wealthy thought, oh, we're going to get our own representation to look out after our property. So they would hire people to do that. Well, eventually, they, of course, thought, the more wealth we amass, the more things we come to own and businesses we come to start, it's getting to be quite expensive for us to be the person that provides all of this security. So they wanted that to be shared amongst the other people in the community. And so that's how we started having formalized police departments being created. By the 1880s, all of the major cities had their own municipal police forces. And what I have here in this presentation that you'll be able to click on and go to is an article that they pulled some of this information from. So that way you can go to that and look at the article, and there's several pieces of it that this Dr. Potter has put together. But I thought it was very cohesive and coherent, and so that's why I'm referencing it. So if you'd like to go and look at that, you're certainly free to do so. And that's a lot of where I got this information about the history of policing. But basically, that's how it comes to be when you're talking about northern states. And in those northern states, they had features in common. So it was publicly supported. There was a bureaucracy. They were actually full-time employees. They weren't volunteers or people who were doing penance anymore. They were actually people who were paid for the purpose. They weren't temporary, and they were accountable. So there was somebody that they had to answer to, and somebody that gave them direction in terms of what was expected of them. So that was how those modern police agencies kind of cropped up. So by then, it's, I guess, about the late 1800s, close to 1900, when those police organizations are up and running. In the southern states, however, policing had a different flavor. They came to be more because of slave patrols. Slave patrols being that group of people that rode horses, had whips and ropes and guns, and their responsibility was to catch slaves and return them to the slave owners. So when you're looking at that kind of development, then it makes a little bit more sense why we would have the issues related to ethnicity, related to oppression, related to stereotypes about ethnic groups and their proclivities. Now that makes a little more sense out of, at least in the South, where that would have come from, because it was the outgrowth of power, control, and maintaining the order that was slavery at that time. So post-Civil War, these organizations that were slave patrols before turned into police departments. So it was the same group of people, just maybe not wearing the same accoutrements when they went out and went to work. So maybe you dispensed with the white hood and you put on the uniform, but it was much the same activity. These organizations were more in charge of controlling the now freed slaves and enforcing Jim Crow laws that eventually become the Ku Klux Klan. So they evolve from the slave patrol into kind of an organized recognized agency that's in charge of creating power and control and maintaining that oppression, that then moves into the Ku Klux Klan, that becomes this outward group that terrorizes in the night. So when you look at how these groups are being created, you start to understand how they kind of have completely different functions, even though they're doing much the same kind of work. So why is policing in the North no different than policing in the South now? Well, when you think about that, what was happening in the South was Jim Crow and trying to control the free slaves. The free slaves, wanting to extricate themselves from that, started moving north. So as those slaves start to move north, then those issues become more to the forefront. Add to that that we had immigration from Europe that was happening. So we had German and Irish and all of these other folks that were coming over, Poles. They were all coming over to the United States. So you have immigration that's coming from Europe, migration that's happening from the South, and you're bringing all of these people into what we'd like to call our melting pot that was happening north of the Mason-Dixon line. So as all of those things start happening, there's this feeling from the folks that are living there that, wow, things are getting out of control. We've got all of these people coming in. We don't know quite what to do with them. And they don't all speak our language and they don't all share our values. And we need somebody to get this under control. So the police were necessary to quell that disturbance. But as we talk about that, we also have to think about that in terms of what are all of the stereotypes that we had for Irish people, for German people, and then for brown people that came from all over. Now all of that gets supplanted into policing. All of that becomes a function of what police officers do. So in the South, it was triggered by the freedom given to the slaves. In the North, it's triggered by that influx of new people that don't speak our language or share our values, and the migration of the Black people into the North trying to escape the oppression in the South. So the link between both of these really is the oppression. That's what created the environment that has made Northern policing and Southern policing simply now policing. So, how is law enforcement oversight born? Because one of the things that people seem to not quite connect is that when you're looking at law enforcement oversight, it very rarely happens voluntarily. Very rarely do you see a police department say, you know what, we were thinking about this the other day and what we thought we needed was some oversight. We just don't feel like we have enough people looking over our shoulder telling us what to do. What do you all think? That's not a conversation that you're ever going to have in a police agency. So what I say is violating constitutional rights can bring good things to life. Remember those commercials where they say, oh, GE, we bring good things to life. Well, sadly, violating constitutional rights can also bring good things to life. So here we start off with Michael Brown. I hope that the video will play. Let's see if we can make it go.
There is growing outrage tonight after an unarmed African-American teenager was shot and killed by police in the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson, Missouri. But there are conflicting reports about what led up to the shooting. NBC's John Yang has the details.
On the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, outrage and anger. Protesters of different ages and races demanding answers in the shooting death of 18-year-old Michael Brown at the hands of a policeman. Investigators said at about noon Saturday, the officer, who hasn't been identified, encountered Brown and another man on the street in an apartment complex. There was a struggle, and one of the men pushed the officer into his car.
Within the police car, there was a struggle over the officer's weapon. There was at least one shot fired within the car.
The struggle spilled out onto the street where Brown, whom investigators say was not armed, was fatally shot.
Police shot this man for no reason. Like it had came from this.
Piaget Crenshaw, who took the cell phone video, says she saw those shots from her apartment balcony.
He's running this way. He turns his body towards this way, hands in the air, being compliant. He gets shot in his face and chest and goes down and dies.
Witnesses said Brown's body lay in the street for hours.
I'd like everybody here to appreciate that it took a very long time yesterday to process this scene.
The shooting sparked a furious reaction. Police responded in force, brandishing assault rifles.
Give us the serenity to understand things.
Michael Brown graduated from high school earlier this spring and was to begin college next week. His mother, Leslie McSpadden, has a message for the officer who killed him.
You're not God. You don't decide when you're going to take somebody from her. If that was the case, I brought him her. I should have took him from her. That was mine. That belonged to me.
Here at the spot where Michael Brown was killed, hundreds still gathering, with calls for an even bigger rally tomorrow at the police station.
So when we're talking about Michael Brown, what you need to know about that is that's part of what spurred the creation of the Civilian Oversight Board in St. Louis, Missouri. I'd like to say that that was the only thing that spurred it, but it had actually been in the works for about 10 years before that happened. Many folks had proposed it, many folks had been in support of it, but we couldn't actually get it to go. So what ended up happening was on the heels of the death of Mr. Brown, there was enough support for that to actually be passed and for the mayor of St. Louis to sign it. So civilian oversight in St. Louis, Missouri actually was authorized in 2015. They started taking complaints in 2016. So here's someone that you probably have not heard of. Her name is India Kager.
Jurors found 2 of 4 Virginia Beach police officers negligent in the death of India Kager. In addition, the jury decided for each ruling, the family should be paid $400,000, totaling $800,000. A split verdict. The final result, 2 out of 4 Virginia Beach police officers found negligent in the shooting death of India Kager, a Navy veteran.
We have a jury verdict showing that, she mattered. She mattered to this world. And I think the family feels some measure of relief and vindication.
In September 2015, police shot and killed India Kager and Angelo Perry outside of a 7-Eleven. Kager was the driver of the car. Perry, who police said was a violent criminal, was the passenger.
He had shot numerous people, 2 of whom he killed. He was on his way to do the exact thing.
Police weren't aware the couple's child was in the back seat of the car. The child was not hurt. Jurors ruled the city of Virginia Beach should pay Kager's family $800,000. Before the trial started, the city offered to settle for $750,000. Kager's family turned down the settlement.
India Kager was more than a number. We were trying to get a recognition that this was a badly executed SWAT takedown and that it should never happen again. And if there is a takeaway, we hope that they have learned something from it and they'll improve going forward.
Those officers did the right thing at the right moment, and I stand by them 100%. I stood by them 100% when this entire case happened. I stand by them 100% now. So does the city.
The Kager family's attorneys say they aren't focused on talking about police in a bad way, but getting compensation for 2 children who were orphaned by what happened. The 7-person jury ruled in favor of 2 other police officers. Both sides can appeal this verdict. I'm Kim Kung, News 3.
So with Ms. Kager, what you find also is that she was really an innocent bystander. There's no indication that she had a weapon, that she shot at anyone. She was not even the target of the search or the arrest warrant. She was instead the significant other of the person who was the focus. What you will see is that that happens frequently.
justice haven't been done in this community, and something need to be done about it. And we ain't leaving from here until we find out.
So repeatedly, what you find is that in these shootings that occur, and I'm not saying that they aren't horrifying circumstances that give rise to this, but part of the difficulty is in the absence of oversight, we don't have a way to look at those policies and look at those practices and see if there are changes that actually need to be made. So paying $800,000 to someone's family after a family member has been lost doesn't bring back that family member, and it doesn't cure that wound, and it doesn't prevent it from happening to the next person. And we're not saying that this is only happening in St. Louis or Philadelphia. This is happening all across our country. So when we're talking about how COBs are born, those are the kinds of incidents that give rise to a COB being created. We at St. Louis Civilian Oversight, we have the power to review cases that allege bias-based policing, discourtesy, excessive use of force, harassment, abuse of authority, sexual harassment and assault, and use of offensive language that is related to protected class type protection. So in other words, related to your ethnicity, maybe your sexual orientation, those kinds of things. That's what we have the power to review. So if a complaint comes in about something other than that, we don't have jurisdiction over it, but it can still be investigated by IAD at the police department. So our mission is to provide transparency and to make sure that there is accountability for the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. We're here to try to facilitate community confidence in our police department. We produce an annual report. This year, we created a quadrennial report. We've been in existence since 2016, but I've actually only been in this role since January of this year. So we went back and started looking at all of our cases since we started and tried to identify trends, tried to see if there were things that we could recommend that might be useful moving forward. We continue in our efforts to make our community safer and to avoid needless death. We really are in a position where we are authorized to review lethal force cases as well. So cases like Michael Brown and Ms. Kager, those are the kinds of cases that we are authorized to review, in addition to the laundry list that I gave you on the last slide. So we are to be reviewing those cases also so that we can make recommendations about what might be appropriate in policy changes or procedural things that need to be incorporated so that we do a better job of keeping our community safe. Because we also want to keep our officers safe. So we want both sides of the fence to be safe. We live in this community. We want to be protected by law enforcement, and we want law enforcement to be protected when they're out there doing their job, especially if they're doing it properly. So what does COB do? We actually review the circumstances of these cases. So when someone comes in and alleges that it was bias-based policing, so maybe they're saying that the police officers were racially profiling, we will take that complaint, we forward it to IAD over at the police department, which is Internal Affairs Division of the police department. They will go ahead and do the actual investigation. They send those documents back to us and we review the investigation they performed. My investigators, I have two, are empowered to review that and get back with IAD if they think that there are things missing. They will put all of that information together and present it to our volunteer board of 7 people who review those cases and determine whether or not they agree or disagree with the outcome, or if they want an independent investigation. If they decide they want an independent investigation, they can authorize my investigators to do that. They will perform that and report back to the board and ultimately to the Commissioner of Police and the Director of Public Safety with regard to the findings. All of our cases that are reviewed, the findings go to the Director of Public Safety and the Chief of Police for review and incorporation into their files. So we continue to do outreach efforts because it's our goal to make sure that everybody in our community knows that we exist and knows what we do and can avail themselves of our services should they need them. So that's part of the reason that we're doing what we're doing today, is making sure that you're aware that these agencies exist, and they exist in other places across our state. They're not just in St. Louis. But because we have these, we certainly want the community to be reaching out to those agencies and letting them know when there's an issue or a problem so it can be addressed. So what's the relationship between education and ensuring community safety? Why is education so important to our process? Well, education is the difference between having civil rights and enforcing civil rights. So what was the greatest strength that slavery offered to plantation owners? Well, it offered them free labor, or nearly free labor. And how was the benefit retained? Well, through those slave patrols that we talked about, through failing to educate those people, through failing to share any kind of information with them that could have been helpful or useful or facilitated them wanting to be off of the plantation. What was the greatest fear when freedom was granted? That they'd no longer have a class of people to do the work on those huge plantations that required so many bodies to harvest and plant all of the things that they had going, and to take care of all of the animals that they had to keep. So think about what Juneteenth is. For those, some people are familiar, some people are not. But Juneteenth is something that's celebrated every June. I believe it's either June 16th or June 19th. And the reason that it's celebrated is because that was the point at which Southern slaves learned that they were free. But it was a full year after the president had signed the documentation that freed them. If you aren't aware that you have a right, you certainly can't get busy asserting it. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the difference between having and enforcing. So we are trying to get the word out to make sure people know that these kinds of agencies exist and that we have the power of oversight. We have the power to make change, but we can't do that if we're not aware of what's happening. So education is what makes the public aware. Filing complaints is what makes our office aware. So once you file a complaint with our office or an office like ours, that's how we are put on notice that there's an issue. Enforcement creates the mechanism for you to assert these rights. So when we get that complaint and we start that process of investigation and reviewing the circumstances of your complaint, that's how that enforcement starts happening. COB and similar agencies can only review things about which they're aware. And at our agency, we cannot take third-party complaints. So in the event that you witness something happening to someone else, but you weren't an involved party, if you come in to file the complaint, we can't actually take that complaint from you. We can only take a complaint from an involved party. So you have to be the person that was involved in the action. The only exception to that is when we're talking about lethal force cases, because obviously if the person was killed, the person that was involved in the altercation can't be the person that comes in and files the complaint. So in those instances, we're allowed to review those cases, even though the complainant obviously can't be the person that was involved in the altercation. Change is not an option without notice that a problem exists. We cannot advocate for change without a reason to advocate for it. So having those complaints come in is the foundation for us to say, we see that this is happening, and it's happened in this instance, and this instance, and this instance. And it gives us the ability to draw on that information so that we can ask for changes to be made. But if we don't have complaints, we can't make that happen. The ability to communicate in writing and orally are the biggest obstacles that face our complainants. And the reason I say that is that because 9 times out of 10, what's going to happen is someone's going to come in and tell me their story. They're going to tell me what happened to them. But in order for me to create a file, they have to actually write down their complaint on the existing, what we call a JCCF. It's the joint civilian complaint form. They have to actually express all of that in writing on that form. They may verbally tell me lots of things, but I have to actually have that in writing in order to make it actionable. So the need to relay information and circumstances clearly is a huge, huge problem for us. You can get our application or our form, online. And so lots of people do. We have gotten forms turned into us that had 2 sentences on them and a signature. We're not going to be able to do very much with investigating that. But having not had that communication with them, either at the point that they're filling out the form or immediately subsequent to that, we don't have a way to relay that to them. So what we have to do is wait until we get it, we review it, and then we reach out to them on the phone number or email that they provide to us. We talk to them, and then we try to help them through creating a more cogent explanation of what happened so that we make sure that our investigation is going to be effective and that it's going to be tailored to the specific things about which they're complaining. So we cannot do our job effectively without you, without people that come in that are willing to file complaints, that are willing to talk about something that may have been one of the most traumatic experiences of their lives. But if we don't have that, we can't effectively push forward to make the change that's necessary to keep us all safe. So absent a powerful and competent educational system, there's no hope for us to be able to enforce these rights. If I can't tell you what your rights are, if you don't know that you have protections against certain things in your housing or in your education or in public accommodation or with law enforcement or with so many other things that you interact with throughout your life, if I don't have a way to educate you about what power you have, and the power to vote is a big one, then I can't expect that you're going to be out there exercising those rights. I can't expect that you're going to be showing up on my doorstep saying that you have a complaint from my office. If you don't know, I can't expect you to be out there fighting for it. So working together, we can facilitate a better, safer, more well-informed community for all of us. So the information I'm sharing with you today, I'm sharing with you because I want you to not keep it to yourself. I want you to tell other people about this. I want you to go online and start searching. I want you to find out about what's in your area. What I have on this slide is information about the agencies that are similar to ours that are scattered across the state. So there's the Citizen Police Review Board in Columbia that does similar to what we do. The Office of Community Complaints in Kansas City, Missouri does what we do. The Missouri Commission on Human Rights, they enforce housing, employment, and public accommodation discrimination laws across the state. So these are all resources that are available to you in the event that you find yourself in need of them. Please reach out to these agencies. In the event that you contact them and they cannot help you, they will be more than glad to refer you to someone who might be able to help you. You may contact the Citizen Police Review Board and they say, I'm sorry, we don't have jurisdiction over your complaint, but you can file that with. So be sure to reach out to them, even if you're not sure if they are the right agency. If they're not, they'll plug you into who is. So thank you so much for all that you do. I know that the majority of the folks I'm talking to are educators, and that was why we were excited about talking to you about it, because you have the ability to share it with so many people that I'm not ever going to be able to reach on my own. So I'm excited about the prospect that you're going to share this information with the folks with which you come into contact with and with your students, I hope. In the event that you need to get in touch with me, you can reach me at the Civilian Oversight Board. Our phone number is there on the slide, or you can visit our website and you can email me from the website. It'll allow you to do that as well. So with that, that is the whole soul and circumstance of what I had to present to you today. I'm hopeful that we'll have some time for questions after so that you and I can talk a little bit more in detail about things that you maybe need clarification on. But if that's not a possibility, please feel free to reach out to me, call me, email me. Happy to talk with you offline as well. Thank you, and thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ms. Kimberly Taylor Riley. We do appreciate the presentation. Again, as she mentioned, you can reach out to her if you have any questions. At the moment, we don't have any questions for our chat. We don't have any questions today, but as Ms. Taylor Riley said, if you have any questions, oh, I do. Hang on one second for me. Okay, one question here. How does this information normally get out to people? I think you're muted. There you are.
There we go. I think we're clear now. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Awesome. Normally, we have a couple of mechanisms. We actually have brochures that we distribute. We also have our webpage, and that's how a lot of folks get in contact with us or find out about us. We do an annual report, and the annual report is posted on our website. So if you go to our website, you'll find our annual reports there, at least for, I believe, 17 and 18 for sure are there. 19 is the one that we're awaiting the approval for, and that's the one that's the quadrennial report. We've actually only been in existence since 2016, so the quadrennial report will cover all 4 years of our existence once it's approved for release, but that hasn't happened yet. Right now, we also do outreach to our community, but that's been thwarted a bit because of COVID, so we haven't been able to be out in the community as much as we'd like to. So we're relegated to Zoom and telephone conferences and things like we're doing today.
Wonderful, thank you. And the second part of the question, I guess the web links to your website is the best way to share that information for people. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. You can share the link that's in the presentation. You can go onto our website and send certain pages if you want to do that. If you have a complaint, you can certainly send in a complaint through our website as well.
Wonderful. Another question is, you mentioned a similar agency. What was the name and location of the last similar agency to what you have going on right now?
I'm sorry, what was the name of what?
I think in your presentation you mentioned a similar agency that was, I guess, did the work that you were doing now. So one of the comments asked, what was the name and location of that last agency?
I think the last agency on the slide was the Missouri Commission on Human Rights. I think that's the last one. And that one is actually statewide, but they have offices in St. Louis, in Kansas City, in Jeff City. They're scattered all over the state. But they have a main number. If you go onto their website under the Missouri Commission on Human Rights, you can find the location that's going to be the closest to you. But they also have an online presence, and you can contact them that way as well.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Next question is, may we get copies of these informative slides? And we will be posting those slides to our website as well. So I will go to the next one. What changes would you like to see across the board for policing? How can we make these organizations better?
Well, if we're making policing organizations better, I guess the focus I would like to see are doing things about misconduct that are reasonably tailored to stopping that behavior. What we find a lot is that even if someone has been determined to have engaged in some level of misconduct, a lot of times the sanction for that is without teeth. And so it doesn't necessarily discourage that behavior on an ongoing basis. What's worse is if we don't do something with people who've been on the department for 10, 15, 20 years, those are the same people that are going to be providing field training to the new officers. So they'll be imparting that improper conduct to the new officers when they come on the department. So we have to make sure that when we sanction, that we do it with an eye toward preventing this from being ongoing behavior. The other thing that we need to look at is when we're talking about screening and we're talking about who we select in the first instance for folks to go on to these departments, we really need to be looking at diversity. We need to be looking at where we're doing the recruiting, what kinds of folks we're looking at, what kinds of testing we're doing to ensure that we're getting people that don't have these implicit or explicit biases that cause us difficulty when they're enforcing in the field. So there are a number of things that we can look at to try to make our police agencies stronger and to make them more acclimated to the work that we need them to do. But we also need to look at the other side of that coin, which is that we have police agencies doing a lot of things that maybe they shouldn't be doing. And we need to look at what other services we need to be putting in place to support their efforts so that they can turn their attention to the things we really need them to do relative to crime and keeping order, as opposed to dealing with folks with mental health or drug issues or other things for which they're not equipped to deal.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for that. And next question is, could changes be made to improve the experience and outcome for persons who are illiterate?
Wow, that's always difficult. When folks are illiterate, it makes it very difficult to even have outreach to them because the normal mechanisms don't really apply. They're not going onto our website and reading about us or seeing a flyer or reading a brochure. That's not how they're going to gather that information. So it makes it a particular challenge to get that information to those folks. What we have tried to do is to work with churches, to work with social service type organizations, to connect with them so that they know that we exist and they can share this information with their clients. But it's a very difficult thing to do, and I can't say that I have an answer to that. We continue to work on that issue, but it is very difficult, especially now in the age of COVID, where we're all removed from each other and having to communicate by these kinds of mechanisms. If you are actually not a literate person, it would be very difficult to get onto a Zoom call and gather information.
Okay, thank you. Next question is there any work being done to encourage the local police department to reference the COB in necessary circumstances?
Well, I need to work on my diplomacy, so I'm probably going to need a minute for how I should word this. But what I would suggest to you is that it is very unlikely that law enforcement is ever going to be the source of a referral to our office. Not that we wouldn't welcome such a referral, but just that when we take complaints, we take them from the public. We don't take them internally from other officers. So it would be a very rare circumstance that an officer would approach a civilian in a, we'll just say, conflict-related circumstance and refer them to the Civilian Oversight Board to file a complaint. I would love to see that happen, but I doubt seriously that it ever will. So instead, what we do is we try to get the word out from our end, and we're also trying to work with the police department so that when they get complaints that fall under the areas of our expertise, that those complaints will be shared with us as well. Right now, the way it's structured, if it comes in on a joint civilian complaint form, it comes into COB. But if it comes in on an IAD form, it goes to the police department, to their internal affairs division, and they do not share those with us. So we're still working on trying to make sure that we have access to complaints regardless of what form they're filed on.
Great, thank you. Next question is, are there specific examples you can name where the COB's review has directly affected police procedure or responded to officer misconduct?
Well, what I can tell you is if you go onto our website, you will find that information in our annual reports. I have only been in this position since January, so I can't tell you of those cases simply because I wasn't here when that was done. Since I've been here just since January, I can't speak to any cases that we've had where we've made any specific changes or even specific recommendations to change policy or procedure. But again, that's only since January. Prior to my tenure, however, there were instances where that happened.
Well, thank you. And just really quick, going back to a previous question about getting the slides, I did get confirmation that we will post the slides, this presentation as well. That will be at a later date sometime this week. I want to get give a more definite answer to that question. Let's see. Oh, follow up on that question. One of the questions here. Going back to the question, could changes be made to improve the experience and outcome for persons who are illiterate? The commenter followed up with more. She was referring to the reporting process, which requires writing.
As far as the reporting process goes, yes, we can assist with that. If they contact our office, if they call us on the phone, or they send us a communication, we can go ahead and assist them. I have 2 investigators on staff, and we also have an executive assistant. That person mans the front desk primarily and works with us to make sure that we get all of our paperwork in order. The investigators will sit down with the complainants and assist them in working through the form and preparing the form if necessary. We've also had people submit forms through their therapist or maybe a member of their clergy that has sat down with them and helped them work through the form. Once we get your complaint, we can then try and clarify and add information as you provide it. But we have to have a written complaint to start with, but we're certainly willing to assist you in that process if you need it.
Great, thank you. Would it be possible to require police or news organizations to share information about the COB during press conferences and or news segments?
Well, the problem is that we aren't in a position where we can require much anything. We exist by ordinance, and so our powers are limited to what the ordinance allows us to do. So the things that I've talked with you about today are things that are specifically set out in the ordinance that we are allowed to do. When you're talking about trying to get the police to share information, they can only, we all report to the Department of Public Safety, and the Director of Public Safety is Judge Jimmy Edwards. We all report to the same person. We're all under the same umbrella when it comes to that. But trying to get other departments to discuss what we do is a very difficult thing to do. And while we may have information related to our office on the mayor's website, and the Department of Public Safety may have it on their website, I don't necessarily have the power to force the police department to have it on their website. So I've got some powers that the ordinance gives to me, but other powers that I simply don't have, and I can't force other departments to do.
Thank you for that. The commenter followed up with that, but who does the public petition to make these requirements a reality?
Well, there are a couple mechanisms. Some things would go through the mayor's office, because certainly the mayor's office has the power to do executive orders for particular things. The Board of Aldermen would be the other group. That's the group that has the power to create the ordinance and ratify it. Generally, it would then go to the mayor's office to be signed off. So in the event we needed to make change to our existing ordinance, if we were going to add powers or change them somehow, it would have to go through the Board of Aldermen. They would have to approve that, and then would have to go to the mayor's office to be signed off as approval and then become law.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you for that. Unless I'm not missing anything, I believe that is all the questions we have at the moment. So I greatly, again, thank you, Ms. Kimberly Taylor Riley, for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow for another session, as well as Friday. So thank you so much. Hope to see you tomorrow, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you so much again, Ms. Taylor Riley.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Be well.